The Israel Tennis Center at Ramat HaSharon. They called it the impossible dream. They had no money and no ground, only a relentless determination to do something for tennis and for kids in Israel. A handful of addicted Americans led and inspired by a tennis-playing dentist from Johannesburg, Dr. Ian Froman.
I think back to 1972, the start of this, when we went to South Africa, trying to raise funds for a tennis center. It's quite incongruous almost to think that today we have one of the finest facilities here in Ramat HaSharon plus 4 others. And at that stage I was trying to help with tennis in Israel, coaching some of the promising juniors. We were climbing through a fence at one of the clubs in order to train Shlomo Glickstein and Chaim and the other junior tennis players that were our potential players, until we were chased off by the guard there and had to climb back through the fence.
3 long years later, they had secured the ground and raised the money. And then, on what had been a strawberry patch, it took them just 6 months to build, thanks largely to a dynamic American contractor called Ruby Josephs.
Not only did he spend all the time building with us, but at the end of it, he gave us $250,000 of his own money.
And soon, the Israel Tennis Center was hosting big-name professional tournaments of its own. But Ian Froman, a double tennis international in his own right, still can't get over the way it was, and what happened when a Davis Cup tie against Iran being played on rented courts didn't finish on time.
The members of the club were playing on the court and they refused to get off the court. So there we were, standing on the side of the court trying to finish a Davis Cup match, and the members said, well, you can start at 12 o'clock because we've got to go at 12.
But what has been achieved since then has been much more than championships and international success.
The impact has been tremendous, and I think it's not only from the point of view of the tennis, but just everything that goes around the tennis itself. You've got the question of the health, of integration of children, behavior on and off the court, a lifetime sport, boys and girls together. There are very few things that can give you all of this in one, and I think this is why the tennis has made the impact it has, not just because of the tennis. Where we are as well, we're raising some great players, some children that are already in world-class standards, and these children, they're our future, so we need it.
Come from all social backgrounds. For some, it's a case of better on the courts than on the streets. And despite the enormous scope of the project, Ian Froman says problems have been of a very minor kind.
You coach 30,000 children, and you occasionally get the mother that comes up and says you saw the coach only hit 4 balls to her child, and why the other child was hit 6 tennis balls, and you think of running around in the snow trying to raise money for tennis, and you think, what the hell? Her son only got 4 backhands and only 3 forehands during the half hour.
A boy who has hit more than 4 backhands is Gilad Blum, who was world under-12 champion, and who, with other young Israelis from the center, has played exhibition matches with the very best.
Perfect! Perfect! Bad luck, partner. I'm coming in if you want me to. You want me to come in?
Yes.
All right. Kid hadn't seen my volley, I guess.
They put together a program that it works for the kids, so if it works for these kids, I'm sure it's going to work for a lot more. You know, so when they're 22, I hope I'm not around anymore.
In. Come on, out in front of you, Simon. Point up.
Among the bright young hopes of Israeli tennis are several children of Olim from South Africa, like Simon Gilchrist and David Kaplan, being coached here by another South African immigrant, Ronnie Sender.
Step.
Whether for children of promise or for the run-of-the-mill beginners, for rich or for poor, all the instruction is free. So far, 4 centers have been built. 3 more are under construction, and there are requests pending for over 20 others.
I don't think the mayor of Afula is looking for a world champion or even for tennis. He's just seen the things that tennis has brought about.
But David Kaplan and Simon Gilchrist are looking to be future champions and will hope to emulate immigrant Davis Cup player David Schneider. As the project grew and grew, did Ian Froman ever have any self-doubts and think that with all the millions of dollars he might just be creating a big white elephant?
I think, in fact, the reverse happened. We had so many children that wanted to play that we found it very difficult, in fact, to cope with the numbers that were pouring through the gates. So we've never really had the worry of not enough children or not enough interest in the sport, but the reverse. In fact, Dick Savage said we've got a high-grade worry. So I said, what's a high-grade worry? He said, if you've got no children, that's a worry. If you've got too many children, that's a high-grade worry. So we've got a high-grade worry to cope with, yeah.
The promoters of squash in Israel have a worry of a different order. Courts are few and far between, and the Israeli Squash Center is located in an old warehouse. But Hillel Bloomberg, a former professional soccer player from Brakpan, has high hopes. These days, Hillel devotes himself entirely to promoting squash, a bug he caught soon after his arrival.
In December 76, I think it was, just after we came on Aliyah, a friend of mine asked me to go and have a game of squash with him. So I said, terrific, but where do you play squash in Israel? So he said, well, you've got to go down south. We drove for about an hour and a half, eventually came to an old squash court, and we had our game. This set me thinking as to possibly whether there were any way of putting in squash courts in Israel on some kind of a permanent basis and starting a squash club itself.
And so, in response to an ad, 30 people gathered in an empty warehouse and signed on for an as-yet non-existent squash club. Special prefabricated courts were brought in from England, and fishermen's nets used to keep the balls in play. Now, the membership runs into hundreds. Almost half are Israeli Sabras, and there's a strong emphasis on coaching youngsters.
In squash all over the world, usually kids start to play the game from the age of about 16, 17, after they leave school and go on to university. We decided that there was no reason why they shouldn't be taught the game at an early age in Israel in a similar way to tennis and other sports.
The best of the youngsters were sent to England for intensive training by one of the top coaches there, an Egyptian called Samir Nadim. Some of the young Israelis, sons of South African immigrants, are in the national squad preparing on the Maccabi village courts for the Maccabi games. But there are also many Israeli members of the Maccabi village club. And the manager from Durban, Rocky Morewitz, says the beginning wasn't all that simple.
We had a very big problem in the beginning, and that's especially around our club. Most of the sports are very informal and played outdoor. People were used to playing tennis out in the sunshine without shirts. When it came to squash, we explained to them that they perspired a lot and everything dripped on the floors and spoilt the floors, and we wanted the club to be nice. And everyone fought like anything about it in the beginning, but they all eventually learned, and everyone's wearing shirts and doing what they should.
Now there is a league with 10 teams. There are plans for prefabricated courts on kibbutzim and for building modern, well-equipped squash centers across the country. And as in between league games the Israeli squad works out, Hillel Bloomberg gets the news that the plan for the first of these projected new centers in Herzliya has been passed by the municipality.
There's no hassles now, right? They're not going to come back and say anything else, right?
We'll keep our fingers crossed.
Keep our fingers crossed. That's fantastic. Yeah. It really is.
The money has been raised in South Africa on a commercial basis, and the aim is to build the very best.
It's going to consist of 8 courts, championship courts, glass back walls, 1 court which will have spectator facilities for about 120 people. All the modern facilities, lounge, bar, little restaurant, etc.
Hours gone in this match now, and the speed and intensity.
And Hillel Bloomberg believes that full-scale international competition, if not around the corner, may not be all that far off.
It'll take quite a while to get to that point, but we reckon that in the next 5 or 6 years, with the right kind of coaching and the right development of the game, that we can really go places in squash in the world.
A young man going places is Barry Mandel, Israel's golf captain, and a computer student here at Bar-Ilan University. And although Barry hits the ball very straight, he doesn't see his future in golf and has no ambition to follow the son on the professional circuit.
The chances are you won't make it. Statistically, I mean, you're 1 out of so many are trying. Statistically, your chances of making it are low. And I enjoy golf as a hobby. I like to be good at golf, but I can't see myself as a profession. I think I'll ruin my golf. I'll ruin the enjoyment of golf if I have to turn that into my profession. Computers is a good enough profession to include golf in it.
Barry, a natural at almost anything he turns his hand to, says he likes playing golf because of the challenge.
And the challenge is yourself. And you can always bring up to the standard that you want to get to, so there's no end to your challenge.
One of the problems in Israel is that golf still tends to be regarded as an old man's game and a rich man's game. This has to be changed, says Barry. First, people must be made to realize that golf is just not as easy as it looks. Introduced and sponsored in Israel by the Barons Rothschild and their Caesarea Development Corporation in the late 50s. But the picturesque seaside club was soon being frequented and run by a dedicated band of immigrants from South Africa. Now the club is facing the challenge of the 1980s, a pressing need for new blood. The campaign so far has brought back the ex-caddies from nearby Orak. But what about getting more Israelis from the rest of the country?
The main thing is bringing down the prices over here. There's a special price, something like $1 per round for all guys from Orakiva, or juniors. Juniors over here is under 28. So that's one thing, bringing down the price. Secondly, there's ideas of building driving ranges in around Tel Aviv, where the main population is. So, and building maybe a pitch and putt, that people can see what golf is about.
All the country's top golfers are South African immigrants, now in their mid-20s. Some of them coached as children by the club professional Charlie Mandelstam.
They arrived with their parents. Their parents either played, took lessons or practiced. They took a club and they realized the whole thing was much more difficult than they thought it was. That got their interest. Barry is our top golfer. He's been for quite a number of years. And I'm very proud of Barry's success. The argument that Barry and I have, Barry reckons it's his own ability. I reckon it's not his ability, it was the great teaching that he received. And this is the constant argument that Barry and I have.
Charlie Mandelstam is only one of many immigrants from South Africa working full-time in sports in Israel. Melvin Solomon, who learned his gymnastics at Rondebosch and at the Wingate Institute in Israel, coaches the outstanding girl juniors. They have come back bedecked with medals from competitions overseas and are now already in training for the World Junior Championships in Moscow this year. Teddy Kaplan, Israeli middleweight champ in 1957 and again 21 years later in 1978, is also a world-class veteran sprinter and a physical fitness instructor. A business executive in South Africa, he retrained at Wingate and says his new job satisfaction is enormous. Louis Geselter, a former president of South African Maccabi, now works for World Maccabi in Israel, where he heads the English-speaking and European desks. One of his latest pet projects was the Maccabi Village bowling green.
There was a woody in the way, which, you know, the usual Israeli style. We moved it and diverted it into another direction. We've had some other obstacles in the way, which was removed, poles, wires, electricity. And I hope we'll have a top-class bowling green.
The Maccabi village is symptomatic of a new trend in Israel, a new concern with the quality of life and leisure. And a lot of the drive and energy for this has come from new immigrants bringing their old cultural values with them. Yoram Kessel from Johannesburg is the Jerusalem correspondent for the London Jewish Chronicle and was Israel's cricket captain for the 1979 Mini World Cup.
Being captain of an Israel team is not really like being a domineering feature of any normal cricket side. It's almost like being like an Israeli prime minister with 3 million plus prime ministers to govern. And an Israeli cricket captain has to have another 10 cricket captains in his side.
Talk to journalists, are you sure?
Yoram was one of several South Africans involved in getting cricket going again in the mid-60s.
This is the kind of field in which we all started on in the mid-60s. We here in Jerusalem are slightly fortunate now. We've always had these wonderful surroundings, the Knesset and the Israel Museum and the government offices and the university. You couldn't wish for more awesome a setting for a cricket game, and any great commentator, I think, would be able to literally have a ball in trying to describe the surroundings.
Today's game is a crucial league match, and the carefree lunchtime atmosphere does little to suggest the fierceness of the competition. The Jerusalem team today has 4 South African immigrant members of the Israeli national side, 2 youngsters back from coaching at the Lord's Winter School, and the bearded stalwarts Yoram Kessel and Stanley Perlman. Yoram Kessel thrives on the competitive nature of the games and their unique atmosphere.
They blend the different peoples and different communities and the different people who live in Israel and go to make up the country. Of course, it's as volatile as everything else in Israeli society, but I don't think that's necessarily, it can sometimes get out of hand, but necessarily I don't think that's a bad thing. I think the commitment, the kind of willingness to play for everything is a wonderful thing, and I personally enjoy that kind of cricket very much, and I think many of the people who come here from other countries who cricket, it's a jolly nice outing, especially if playing on a club level, but when you play here, you're playing for everything, and I think that's a nice way to play a sport.
Yes! Yes!
From the modest beginnings in the 60s, there are now 3 leagues in Israel, and Israel is an associate member of the International Cricket Conference. Today's game is evenly matched, and fortunes change dramatically. One of the first sponsors of the revival of cricket in Israel was England international Ken Barrington. He brought over the first touring party in the late 60s. Israel's first tour abroad was to England in 1970, but the high point so far was undoubtedly participation in the 1979 World Cup competition, held under the auspices of the ICC, and with a host of unlikely countries ranging from Papua New Guinea and Fiji to Bangladesh and Argentina. The Israelis acquitted themselves extremely well on the tour and almost caused a major upset in their first World Cup game against a United States team boasting some class Indian and West Indian players.
We had them 31 for 7, which was absolutely remarkable. We fielded and bowled like never before, and there was a dynamism about it. And then on a hat-trick, unfortunately, we dropped a slip catch. It might have been the real making of Israeli cricket, but there it is. That's the game.
Israel has, of course, excelled in international competition in many other sports. Israel is one of the top basketball countries in Europe. In football, Israel competes for a place in the World Cup finals, last achieved in Mexico in 1970. Israel has produced a series of sailing champions. World-class athletes come to Israel to compete in the Hapoel and Maccabi Games. And in the Olympics, Israel always sends a sizable contingent. Distinguished in recent years by the performance of hurdler Esther Roth, and tennis coach Ronnie Sender has his sights set on the marathon in Los Angeles in 1984. Many other South African immigrants are Israeli champions. In bowls, Cecil Bransky and former Rhodesian Jack Trappler. In judo and jiu-jitsu, Dennis Hanover, whose children are all champions too. Dennis, the man who started up jiu-jitsu in the country, reached the pinnacle of his career in the 1975 Tokyo World Open Karate Championship. Here, contestants have to sign a waiver forfeiting all claims for injury or death. Dennis Hanover's opponent was one of the outstanding fighters there, the American W. Oliver. Maxi Khan from Petersburg, who represented Israel in clay pigeon shooting at the Tokyo Olympics, is now building a shooting range in memory of his son Dani. He has over 400 dunams of land in Caesarea, which he hopes eventually to develop into a major sports complex with swimming, archery, tennis, a cricket oval, and a stadium for hockey and rugby. Another pioneer is Howard Lipschitz, a Springbok at 17. He brought archery to the country when he came on Aliyah and was Israeli champion for 8 successive years. A member of the Olympic squad which missed the boycotted Moscow Games, this year he will compete in the World Championships in Italy. Hockey, which had been played in Mandate days, was also brought back into the country by South African immigrants, with Sandy Schall of Balfour Park in the forefront. She was only 19 at the time. How did she have the courage to stick to her guns when everyone was telling her she didn't have a chance?
Well, I think age was on my side, because when I used to walk into the offices of all the top sporting personalities in Israel and tell them that, I was going to start a new sport in Israel, first of all, they thought, well, maybe my Hebrew's not that good enough and I didn't know what I was talking about, which they were right. And when I showed that I was really keen, that we were determined, they took a keen interest in me. I think they were keen more out of curiosity than anything else.
By the way. Oh, very good. Now do it twice in the edge. All right.
I've got to score 1.
Now, after only 3 years, the game is in the Maccabiah itinerary, and the men have already won games against overseas sides.
Talk about the attack.
David, I don't know if you saw in the soccer Brazil there, but they had a very good thing. You could watch the backs.
Let's talk about a 4-man forward line. Let's talk about a 5-man forward line, if you like.
Sandy admits she never envisaged that hockey would grow as quickly as it has or reach the level it has.
Well, the truth is, when I started hockey, I started it mainly for the social side of it. For a social game every Saturday afternoon, and just to meet people, and I thought it was a good way of klita.
And Sandy makes the point that hockey has been a very important factor in her social integration in Israel.
A lot of new immigrants just don't find their niche and don't fit into it. They remain new immigrants for the rest of their lives. And I think that if you give the new immigrants what they had back home, it will bring them closer to Israel and it will integrate them better.
It was a South African, too, who brought bowls to Israel. In the early 50s, Max Spitz was able to persuade Ramat Gan Mayor Abraham Krinitzi, here bowling the first wood, to set aside land for Israel's first ever green. Many Israelis took to the game, Max Spitz says, because of the relaxation it affords. And Israeli bowlers are now in world class and have also hosted the World Paraplegic Games. Badminton, introduced through the tireless efforts of Jeff Geffen and his wife Doreen, is at an earlier stage of development, but here too, as in the tennis, there has been a lot of work with underprivileged children, and Israelis are already playing in international tournaments like the Plume d'Or. And of course, rugby, how could it be otherwise, was started by a group of young South Africans on Kibbutz Israel.
There were volunteers from all over the world here, mainly, Australia, South Africans, England, New Zealand. There we were, Australia against South Africa, with our Rupert Rosenblum, who played fly-off for Australia at the time. He was really good, and he gave a lot of punch to the start of the game.
We had an Englishman that played rugby league back home, and he was playing his game was so dirty they would have eventually kick him off the field. We couldn't handle it anymore. He played for us and we kicked him off the field. We couldn't handle it anymore.
When I arrived on Aliyah in 1973, I probably was the biggest guy in my group. And I remember Louis' face lighting up when he saw me. He says, "Oh, another rugby player." And I think it was with that he firstly threw me the keys of the clubhouse. Well, there was no such thing as a clubhouse. And he said, "Well, look, boy, I've had it now for 2 years on my back. All the wives that have been moaning about their husbands playing rugby and the kibbutz, it's your baby as from now."
Milton Kaplan works in the kibbutz dairy and explains why there was such determination to play rugby.
We came enthused to settle in Israel, and with this enthusiasm, we took on to playing the game and to try and make it succeed in Israel. So I think primarily it was our enthusiasm to, one, succeed in our aliyah and using anything at our disposal to make our integration into this country a good one.
Bernie Fink coaches the kibbutz youth teams and can be proud of what he has achieved with them.
You get all that? Oh no, I don't think that.
10 Meyer.
The national side is about to leave on its first tour overseas to France and Switzerland. The players gather from all over the country for night training at Wingate. Milton Kaplan is the captain and Louis Milner the manager. Callie Sachs, one of the team's coaches.
For the tour that we should do to perfect them. And Milton, you must remember them, because when you get back, these are the things you've got to keep practicing after practice.
What does Milton expect to gain from the tour?
It's going to be an incentive for players that are knocking on the door to know that rugby in this country is alive, and we are trying to achieve more than just playing every Saturday game, but also to try and broaden our horizons and our borders as well.
Good
Paddle forward and back. Up.
From its beginnings on Kibbutz Yisrael, rugby was brought by some of the South African volunteers there to the universities. Now the National League is comprised of university and kibbutz teams. One of the regular annual fixtures is universities versus kibbutzim. Many Israeli sabras play the game, and Yaron Drori has propped for Israel for years.
When you see most of the sport in Israel, you see that there's nothing before or nothing after the game. And what I gain from rugby is the sportsmanship and the friendship and the getting together after the game and the getting together in Saturdays and in evenings and the whole atmosphere around the game.
In Jerusalem, victories are celebrated in the tavern, often with ribald rugby songs.
And on that farm, they had a goose. And the dogs were dogging it in. The dogs were dogging it in. And the rams were running it in. The rams are running it there. They were running it in, running it there, running it everywhere. Oh, MacDonald had a farm.
And as the revelers roll out of the tavern, Jerusalem Post sports editor Philip Gillon pounds away at his typewriter for the Sunday morning sports pages. As a result of the flowering of the new sports in Israel, the Post has extended its sports coverage.
And I insisted there's a whole new generation of immigrants who want sport. And in the end they gave in to me. You know, you argue a thing long enough. It's like getting cricket going, the same kind of thing. I got the sports pages going, and we've had a terrific response.
Philip Gillon complains that much of the space has to go to reporting results. He would like to see more features and still more extensive coverage.
The main thing about sport, according to my thinking, is its drama, its excitement, its humor, its piquancy, and all this kind of stuff you've got to get in as features. And of course we're going to expand that. My editors don't know this yet, but they'll learn. I have no doubt that in the end we'll take over most of the Jerusalem Post.
So South Africans have done much to fill the sporting pages of the Israeli press. Their record is a proud one. So much has already been written, and there are still many more chapters of sports history to be written by South African immigrants in Israel.